Today we'll be talking about organizing and displaying data. This PowerPoint presentation was originally created by Dr. Stacy Metz when she was in the Department of Health. She is now in the Department of Grad Social Work at Westchester. So I updated and modified some of this material for our class this semester. Our objectives throughout this module, which is Module 4, are to distinguish among the different measurement scales and as well as the implications for selecting statistical methods based on those distinctions, as well as applying descriptive techniques commonly used to summarize public health data. The student outcomes for today are to organize and effectively display public health related data, as well as using SPSS software to manage and analyze public health related data. Why should we summarize data? Well, we may want to describe characteristics of our sample. A lot of times there's a table that describes the demographics and maybe some main characteristics of the sample that were key variables for your study. You also might want to illustrate your data effectively for presentations and publication. Many journals require tables as well as graphs or pictures. And this also allows your audience to see what you found in a faster, maybe more easy to understand way. What are the parts of a table in APA style? There's several. This image shows what a standard APA table looks like. And I'm going to walk you through the different parts of it. So the first line is the table number. So this is where we have the word table and an Arabic numeral, so 1, 2, whatever table we're at in an article or in a textbook, things like that. You don't want to write an in-text summary that refers the reader to a specific page or to the table above or below. You just want to refer to the table number, such as see table 1 or table 1 shows that blah, blah, blah. In an article, each table should be numbered sequentially in the order they appear. You don't want to use suffix letters or numbers within the table numbers in articles. So if we had 3 tables, our first table would be table 1, the second table would be table 2, and the third table would be table 3. The next line of the table is a title. So here is a space, one enter space down from the table and its numeral. And then this title is italicized. In this example, the title is Means and Standard Deviations on the Measure of Self-Direction in Learning as a Function of Age in Adult Students. I know, it's a long title in this case. Your titles may not always be that long or super that specific. But what you do want to include in the table is some variable of interest, the group on whom the data was collected from, if you're analyzing subgroups, and what kind of information is being reported. Are you reporting descriptive statistics? Are you reporting inferential statistics? We haven't done them yet in class, but in the future you may be reporting those in a table. The table title and heading should concisely describe what's in the table. It must be italicized. It should be about a sentence. You don't want it to be too long, but you want it to have enough information that someone looking at the table knows what it's showing. The next thing we can talk about are the table headings. So the headings are the next 2 rows in the table, and they're really used to explain how the table is organized. So the first row doesn't have anything in the first 2 columns, but the second 2 columns, so the last 2 columns, have a column spanner, which is called the inventory score. Then underneath that, we have to the far left the age group, since we're talking about age groupings here. Then we have the number in the sample that fall into each age group is the next title. It's just N that's italicized. Then our last two columns underneath inventory score are M and SD. These are the headings that let us know that we are going to be seeing the mean and standard deviation. Sometimes you might want to use abbreviations in headings, like here they use the N to indicate the number in the sample or the frequency of the sample, and they are using M and SD to indicate mean and standard deviation. Like, these are standard abbreviations, and you don't have to explain these. But if you have something that isn't a standard abbreviation or is an acronym or is some sort of variable name that not someone that knows a little bit about the field would know what it means, you want to write those out in a note at the bottom of the table, which we will talk about. Each column has to have a heading, including the stub column. The stub column is that farthest left column. Here it's the age group column. Sometimes you can refer to this as characteristics, variables, something like that. If we're talking about the table 1 that you'll be producing for your homework, it'll be like the characteristics will be what you want to put there. Because that's where we're listing the significant IVs or independent variables and the levels of those variables. We want to eliminate having too many headings that are spaced out, like those column spanner where it has inventory score and then a line and then the mean and standard deviation. We don't want to go too much more than that because people will be confused looking at it. So just be aware of that. And you want to use sentence capitalization in your headings. So here, age group, age is capitalized, group is not, and inventory score, inventory is capitalized, but score is not. Something else we want to notice about this table is that there are no vertical lines that appear in APA style tables. We want to have approximately 3 horizontal lines. So in Word, you would be using the draw or borders feature for tables, or if you're printing this out and drawing it in the future, you can draw in the lines. But we're going to be using Word for this class, so you'll need to know how to use the draw or borders feature. And I will have a document posted on D2L that tells you exactly how to do that step by step, if you don't already know. So where you should have lines for an APA style table are underneath your table title, underneath your heading, and then underneath the last row of the data in your table. So those are the 3 points you must have a horizontal line. And now you don't want to separate each variable with lines. So in this one, there's a line between inventory score and mean and standard deviation. This is okay, but standard APA tables would just have the line above the, underneath the title, underneath the headings, just one underneath the row of headings before the data starts, and then one underneath the body of the table. And the body of the table is just referring to all of the information that's contained between the headings and the end of the table. So in this case, the age groups are listed 20 to 34, 35 to 40, 50 to 64, 65 to 69, and 79 and 80 plus. And then they have the number listed for each of those age groups, as well as the mean and standard deviation on that inventory score for each group. Underneath the bottom line of our table, that horizontal line in our table, are notes. We're going to talk more about notes on the next page. So I won't get too much into that now, but I wanted to point out that if we are in the body of the table again, um, you want to round your numbers so that it improves readability. So a good guideline is to report 2 digits more than the raw data so that you can compare numbers down a column more easily. However, um, if there's an industry standard where you would want to report 3 decimal places, that's fine. That's would be different if the industry standard was to report 1 decimal place, then you want to report 1. However, you want to be consistent as possible across your table. So if you're reporting multiple values in your table, you want to stay consistent with the number of decimal places. So if we're reporting the mean and standard deviation for age, the mean and standard deviation for height and weight, we would want to stay consistent, either reporting 1 decimal place or 2 decimal places for all of those values. If the cell can't be filled because there's no information available, so in this table, the age group 80 plus has no information, you'll want to leave it blank. Or if it can't be filled because you couldn't obtain the data or it wasn't reported, then you can insert a dash and explain the dash with a note underneath the table. Now we're going to talk about notes for a table. There's 3 types of notes: general notes, specific notes, and probability notes. A general note just provides information about the table as a whole. So this is where you would explain abbreviations, if the table came from some other source, something that talks overall about the whole table. Then an example would be the note in italics, period. This could be used to indicate if the table came from another source, period. That would be how you would format that note underneath the table. A specific note refers to one specific row, column, or cell of the table and is given a superscript lowercase letter starting with the letter A. So as an example, you could have the superscript lowercase a, then N, which is both of those would be italicized in this case, and then that would be equal to 50. So that's saying that that cell has a sample size of 50, or that row has a sample size of 50. And they're identified in the body of your information with that superscript letter. And then again, you refer to that letter in the specific note at the bottom of underneath your table. A probability note is included if you're running inferential statistics that have been computed, and there isn't a column that shows the probability. Here you would want to use an asterisk to indicate the statistical significance of the findings you presented in the table. So it's common to use 1 asterisk for 0.05 and 2 for 0.01. We haven't really talked too much about what that means yet, so we're not going to get too much into that. But when we do start reporting inferential statistics and p-values, this is what you're going to want to refer back to, and I will remind you about this when we get there. But just so you know, when we're reporting probability, you'll have a probability note in the table, and probability notes use asterisks. How are we going to order our notes in a table? Say we have more than one note we want to list. We should list them in order from general notes first, then those specific notes, and then finally probability notes. None of these should be indented, they should be in line with the left of the table. Some things to remember is that abbreviations for technical terms, group names, and things of a similar nature must be explained in a note. That way your reader can really understand what you're getting at in your table. Some more tips. I have a number of tips for you, but these are just some. A table title has to be standalone for those without any prior knowledge of your study. The variable name should be easy for a reader to understand, and they should be left aligned in that first column with the categories consistently indented underneath if you have categories. So for nominal variables, you'll want to list, say, for example, we have a nominal variable of gender. Our first one row will be gender, then the next row will indent and have male, the following row will indent and have female, and then another row will indent and have transgender. That would be what I mean here by that indenting. Those indented indented categories should be consistent throughout. So if you had another nominal or ordinal variable, you would want it to be indented the same distance as that first one. Values in a second column should be in the body of your table should be placed centered, and the symbols that you use should match your header symbols, your header row. So if we were going to use mean plus or minus SD, M plus or minus SD, in our table then, when we're reporting the mean and standard deviation, we need to use that plus minus symbol. If we're reporting number and percent, but we're using number with percent in parentheses, we'll want to report the number and then in parentheses the percentage of the population that fell into that category. Again, you want to make sure your decimal places are consistent and your line bordering is an APA style, which again is a line border at the top of the table, beneath the header row, and at the bottom of the table before the notes. So here are some actual checklists from the APA that they have for tables. Is the entire table single or double spaced, including the title, headings, and notes? If not, fix it so it is. Is the title brief but explanatory? Does every column have a column heading? Are all abbreviations, special use of italics, parentheses, dashes, and special symbols explained? Are all vertical rules or lines eliminated? Is the table referred to in a text write-up? So here we might not have as much of an issue with that last one. However, I will ask you to be writing text write-ups. So when you are writing those, be sure you're not saying in the table above or in the table below. You want to use the language in table 1 or see table 1 to tell me that you're referring to the table we just created. So some things you should know about descriptive statistics tables in APA style. Most research studies and program evaluations include a table that summarizes characteristics of a sample, providing a reader with an overall picture of the participants of that study or evaluation. It's often reported first in the report, so it's called Table 1. In order to summarize data, you want to remember that any continuous variable will be reported with a mean and standard deviation. Any categorical variable, like nominal or ordinal variables, will be reported with a number and percent within each category of that variable. So you want to remember to not report a mean and standard deviation for a categorical variable. Even if it's produced in SPSS, you want to know that that's not a meaningful descriptive of the data you're showing in that table. So here we have an example descriptive statistics table in APA style. So the first row is table 1, no italics, that's it. The second row is italicized, saying summary characteristics in stress and pet ownership study. Then the next row is the header row that says the characteristic, and then the second column has mean plus or minus SD or number and percent. So this is done often so that you can condense your data into one column instead of having multiple columns showing One column has means, one column has standard deviations, a third column has the number of frequency, and a fourth column has a percent. That's going to make the table look huge and it'd be hard to read. So we combine all of those four categories into one column, and you just have to report them as appropriate. So our first example is age measured in years, and that's reported with the mean plus or minus the standard deviation centered in that column. The next variable is pet ownership, which is measured nominally as yes or no. So yes or no is indented underneath the title pet ownership. And then for those two categories, we're reporting the number and percent in each of them in that same column that we listed the mean and standard deviation previously. And then the third variable we're summarizing here is current stress level. And there's four categories now: no stress, low stress, moderate stress, and high stress. And you can see that we have 0 people in the no stress, so 0 or 0.0% is reported. You could also report this with a dash and then a note at the bottom saying no participants reported a stress level of none, or all participants reported a low stress level or higher. Something of that nature if you didn't want to put the 0 in here. And then low stress, we had 5 individuals, which was 50% of the sample. Moderate was 3 individuals, 30% of the sample. And high stress is 2 individuals, or 20% of the sample. Now, since I have the percentage symbol in the top header row, I don't include it in the body of the text. So next to the yes option of pet ownership, underneath the mean, standard deviation, number, percent row, I have 4 parentheses, 40.0 parentheses. I have the 0.0 in the percent because in the age category, I'm reporting out to 1 decimal place. So I'm trying to maintain consistency there across the table. Summarizing continuous variables. So on the left is a picture of the output from SPSS showing you the statistics for age. There's 10 people in the sample, that's the valid N. There's the mean value, the median, standard deviation, and a whole bunch of other things. So in a professional table, you're going to want to report the mean and standard deviation of this age variable. So there's 2 ways to do that. You can have characteristics mean plus or minus SD, and then your characteristic would be age measured in years, and then your results would be filled in from that SPSS output. So in this case, the mean is 28.80 plus or minus, since that's what we had in our header row, 11.45, which is the standard deviation. The other option, if you don't like that plus or minus, trying to find that in the options in your word processing software, you can put the mean with the standard deviation in parentheses. So that's just what that second table is showing you. That for the characteristics, we have then the header says mean parentheses SD, close the parentheses. And then for age, we have 28.8, open the parentheses, 11.4, close the parentheses. Now, I can tell you the difference between these. Besides just the parentheses for your SD or the plus or minus symbol, in the first example, I reported out 2 decimal places for both the mean and the SD. In the second example, I only reported out 1 decimal place. Either of these is correct. If you reported just 28 or you rounded to 29, I might tell you to, in the future, then round to 1 decimal place, just for consistency and to make it more specific for the reader. Now here we're going to look at how to summarize categorical variables in APA style. So again, on the left is the SPSS output from a frequency procedure on the variable pet ownership and stress level. So remember that looks like the two response options for pet ownership were yes and no. Then we have the frequency column, which is the number that reported those responses. Then we have the percent column. So in a professional table, again, we'll want to list the characteristics in the header row. Then we will want to list how we're summarizing that data with an N, parentheses, percent, close the parentheses. Here we don't ever use the plus minus symbol for nominal or ordinal variables because that just doesn't make any sense. So we always put nominal or ordinal variables in with a number and then a percent in parentheses. And again, you do not need to use the percent symbol in your table body, just in that header row.